Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to One Work, Five Questions with Donna Vitek, that's me, and Dr. Mark Andrew Holowchak, and that's him. And we have a different look today, Dr. Holowchak. Can you tell us why? What are you celebrating?
Michigan Wolverines just dismantled Ohio State yesterday, and I'm still, I guess, celebrating, letting my hair down over the victory. I don't know what, it's just a different. I have my dog licking the computer screen, part in the corner for some reason, little Jefferson, but so we're off to a zany start today. Jeff, what are you licking?
He's like, I like that hostess of the show.
Yeah, maybe he is, and he's trying to get to you.
Well, it looks nice. I like it. I like it down.
Okay.
So I'm excited to do today's show because it's kind of a spinoff of the Thomas Jefferson thoughts on freedom of speech and freedom of the press. This is our part two of our spinoff. So I'd like to welcome all of you to this discussion today. Dr. Holowchak, for those of you who don't know, he is a retired professor of philosophy and history, and he's taught at institutions such as University of Pittsburgh, University of Michigan, go Wolverines, and Rutgers University, Camden, Ohio University. And he's also the editor of the Journal of Thomas Jefferson and His Time, and he has also been the author of over 20 published books of Thomas Jefferson, and close to 150, or we had 155 now, essays on
Something
Jefferson.
Like that. Yeah, I think it's 155. I don't know.
And you know what? I bet everyone is fantastic. If you haven't read Dr. Holowchak's writing, please do. It's amazing. He's so eloquent with words, and you keep a dictionary close by. The locations of his books and videos will be in the description of our video today. So with our show, One Work, Five Questions, I'll ask Dr. Holowchak 5 questions on one work of Thomas Jefferson. And so today we have 5 questions prepared, but we may end up with more questions with this topic. So let me...
And the topic is Thomas Jefferson, Sally Hemings, for the most part. We're going to be talking about that.
Yes.
With respect to freedom of speech, so we're not really focusing on a particular work today. This is continuation of last week.
Yes, and although what I think is quite honorable is although the freedom of the press was actually used against President Jefferson, he still wants to protect it and didn't change his mind on having freedom of the press.
Think of the alternative.
Right.
That's the scary part.
So that's quite honorable that he stood firm on his belief of freedom of the press, even though they were using the press to destroy him. What's changed, huh? Not much has changed. Okay, question number 1.
Here's the little mutt. Say hello, Jeffy.
Oh, hi, Jeffy. Oh, keep him up there. He's so cute.
I have to hold him. He's on my lap right now. He only comes on my lap when the show starts, and I don't quite know why. It might be something about your voice, so I think that's a nice thing for you.
He's like, I bet she has treats. She sounds like a nice lady. I do, Jeffy. Okay. Question number 1. What are the standing rumors as of today regarding Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings?
I don't know what you mean by standing rumors. The official position at Monticellos is that it's just a fact.
Okay.
Which is sort of ridiculous. It's I can read you what the president of the foundation, Leslie Bowman, says. I have that here.
Okay.
The new exhibit, she wrote this in 2018. The new exhibit exploring the life of Sally Hemings, her choices, and her connection to Thomas Jefferson, as well as in updates to our related online materials and print publications. The foundation will henceforth assert what the evidence indicates and eliminate qualifying language related to the paternity of Eston Hemings, as well as that related to Sally Hemings' 3 other surviving children, whose descendants were not part of the 1998 DNA study. So that the idea here, and that's what brought me to Lynchburg, is to fight this, is that the evidence is the DNA evidence on the last child, Eston Hemings, right? let me explain that to the audience, is that they did Y chromosome DNA test, the last, the 23rd chromosome, I believe.
Mhm.
And they took one sampling of a descendant of Eston in the male line. And I say that because if you know something about the genetic material, the Y chromosome throughout the male line is identical. So in other words, my Y chromosome is exactly the same as my two brothers, exactly the same as my father, his father, and any male descendants I might have or my brothers might have.
Mhm.
So to find, as they did, they took one sample from this male line descendant of Eston
Mhm.
and found the Jefferson Y chromosome. Now that indicates that he had the Jefferson Y chromosome, that Thomas Jefferson could be the father, or anybody in the male line, Jefferson's brother's sons, or anybody in the Jefferson male line could be the father. Now you
Where
notice,
where did they get the Jefferson chromosome, Y chromosome, to compare it? Do you know?
Field Jefferson, yeah, Jefferson's father's brother, a descendant of Field Jefferson,
Okay.
to compare it. So
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and you know, follow that line of reasoning. It doesn't necessarily show that Eston has the Jefferson Y chromosome. Imagine if someone in the bloodline had entered into, someone with the male line Jefferson had entered into and had sex along the way in Eston's tree, and then, you know, so you get someone in the Jefferson line somewhere along the way, that, and that shows that the Y chromosome comes in that way.
Okay. So there could be there there are multiple ways the Jefferson chromosome could have gone through Sally Hemings then.
Yeah, the most likely explanation is that, you know, Eston had that chromosome, and Eston was, you know, what it shows biologically, if all things are legitimate, there weren't no mistakes with the handling of the DNA and no intervention in the line, that Eston had the Jefferson Y chromosome, so
Right.
Jefferson could be the father.
Right. Right. Okay. So there's a possibility, but and then what are the other equal possibilities as well?
So any other male line Jefferson, I mean,
Okay.
how do you, you know, Joseph Ellis argues, I talk about this in my book. Well, you're going to have that up later, but this one,
Okay.
most recent one, he says, well, this is just lost cause apologetics. You know, these people that they want to argue that could have been someone else other than Jefferson, when the simplest explanation is that it's Jefferson. Now, why is that simpler? Well, because Jefferson was at Monticello all the time. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that his brother couldn't have been the father.
Right.
Or when his brother came in to visit, he could have had children with Sally Hemings. And
Where was Sally's mother? Do we know anything about Sally's mother and who Sally's mother had relationships with? Because if the mother had a relationship at all with
she had with a Captain John Wales, who was white, and so Sally Hemings, she was, her mother
okay.
had sex with a white person.
Okay.
And Wales was also the father of Jefferson's wife.
Okay.
So what we do, we don't know this, but it seems very probable that Sally Hemings was the half sister of his wife Martha.
Right. Okay. So that could explain any rumors of special treatment.
Absolutely. I mean,
right.
that's, you know, all the Hemings children we do know were given cushy jobs. And of course, if they were dear to,
Okay.
if that's his wife's stepsister, whatever,
right.
I mean, why wouldn't he give them cushy jobs? And
do we know what the relationship was like between Martha and Sally?
no,
okay.
I don't know anything about it.
Okay.
Jefferson,
Okay.
the only stuff we have is Jefferson's farm books and stuff where he talks about his slaves and
Okay.
doing as inventory. And if Winsick and other people said, well, that just shows you that he treated his slaves just like objects, because he takes inventory with them. How many blankets did I give to this slave and that slave? And, you know, when was a new child born? But anybody who was a farm owner, would have done the same thing.
Right. Well, I know how I am. I'm meticulous with everything and accountable for everything. So I probably
Yeah,
would have done it's people that think and process information differently only see things through their way of thinking. They don't think about that other people think of things differently, and that doesn't mean anything. Don't read into it as what was done to
absolutely. I say
President Jefferson.
Winsec talked about how he treated his slaves instrumentally, and just no compassion. He treated everybody that way. That's how he thought.
Right, right.
When his
So,
best friend Dabney Carr died, instead of just, he mentions in his farm book that one person's digging up, grub staking the land at which Dabney's going to be buried. It takes him 7 hours. So he goes, well, by calculation, two could do it in 3.5 hours. And I'm thinking, why is that so significant to put in? Well, that was just after his friend died. So instead of writing something down about my best friend just died, he's talking about, pulling stones out of land and making it arable, I guess.
yeah. My next question, well, I guess this was actually question one. How did the rumor get started? How did all of this even get started?
A calendar, a notorious person, scandal monger, who was James Thompson Callender,
Okay.
was British, and he wrote so many troublesome publications in England that he was banned from England, so he came to the United States. And then when he got here, his main thing was anti-federalism. So he was all over George Washington. He jumped all over John Adams and things like that. And Jefferson, this was in the days just prior to the presidency, and Jefferson realized, well, maybe Callender, he's obviously could be of some use to us to refute the sort of heresies of the Federalists, like Alexander Hamilton, and Jefferson gets him a job at a newspaper called the Aurora, so he could publish and write things. And Callender was a notorious alcoholic, and he was a chameleon in the sense that he had no loyalties to anybody other than himself, and wherever the money was, he'd go. And he had no qualms about changing his position on any issue if it would suit him financially, or it would be a career move for him. So at some point, he talks about he's publishing all this stuff against the Federalists. He gets thrown in jail, Alien and Sedition Acts. His behavior is seditious. When Jefferson becomes president, Jefferson takes all the people who have been thrown in jail according to the Sedition Act and relieves Callender among them. He gets him out of jail, and Callender wants to be rewarded. He wants the position, the rather lucrative and prestigious position of Postmaster General of Richmond.
Oh,
okay. You'd think today, I want to be postmaster. You think, well, not very lofty ambition, but that was a very important job at the time. The post office was that was just how they sent information on horseback from town to town. And the speed with which you could send a letter by a horseback dictated how soon news got from point A to point B. So it was a very important position. Jefferson realized that this guy was becoming trouble and just was more than a handful, denied him the job, and Callender got mad and jumped all over Jefferson. And in 1802, came out with this story about Thomas Jefferson's Sally Hemings.
Okay, and that was the article I just had up. That was published in the paper. Okay. So the rumor, it seemed to, and this was, what year was that published in the newspaper?
I think 1802.
1802. Okay, and why the rumor? I don't recall ever hearing about that as a child. It wasn't until I became an adult that I started hearing about Thomas Jefferson and his slave. And I'm thinking, what is everyone talking about? So why did it seem to be dormant for so long? And why is it so?
Other than the radical high Federalists, no one took it seriously. Jefferson just didn't. I mean, anybody who's president even today, there are going to be all sorts of rumors about your personal life. Many of which are just false, no matter who you are.
Right.
People just want to knock you off your pedestal. So, and Callender was mad at Jefferson, so he turned on Jefferson, and it was a bad move on his part. He wound up, by the way, I should say, found it was July 1803. He was in a drunken stupor. He was seen on that day, and later his body was fished out of the James River. So how he got into the river, whether he just fell off something or walked into it, or someone murdered him and threw him, no one. I suspect no one really cared how he died.
Mm-hmm.
He was a person in some sense, a person of little consequence.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, but that tells me something. I had just read an article about in my graduate class on history, and the closer you are to the time and event, the more truthful that you can count on. And as it gets further and further from the year of the event occurred, that leaves a lot of room for the story to change, lies, and things to creep into history. So the fact that nobody made a big deal out of it at the time, nobody believed it, that tells us something about.
It's not nobody believed that. The people that
truth.
didn't like Jefferson,
well, right,
were very eager to jump on it. And there was even one person who swore that he came to Charlottesville and talked to all of Jefferson's neighbors, and all of them agreed that he was having an affair with Sally Hemings. Now, this is ridiculous too.
right. Okay. Do you know why James Callender chose Sally? I'm sure she wasn't the only female
I
black
don't know.
slave.
It could have been, there could have been some truth. I hate to use some truth, because truth is not something that emits of degrees, but there could have been some truth to it. In other words, well, I'm sure he heard the rumor circulating somewhere.
Right.
He was one to pick up, like he knew of Alexander Hamilton's affair with a woman, and probably picked up on an extant rumor and then ran with it. So, this is juicy enough that warrants further investigation. And now, if you're asking if there's anything especially significant about Sally Hemings that might make her an attractive candidate, yes and no. She was much younger than Jefferson. She was light-skinned. She was attractive. We know so little about her, but she probably was very illiterate. So I think that would have been a huge strike against her for Jefferson. And she was, as we know, she was the half sister of his wife. So
okay, yeah, I could see if Callender was a heavy drinker, I could see him and his buddies at the pub, talking about how we could do in Jefferson. Okay, my next question is, we know the DNA shows it's in the Jefferson bloodline. Can you tell me who else could be the father? You mentioned his brother, and why would his brother be an option?
There is some testimony that puts him at the scene of the crime, as it were. Let me see if I can find something here. I do have, here we go. It is, there are 4 bits of testimony that show that there is, that a relationship was unlikely. 4 bits, I say, of direct testimony, one of which is a direct admission. I'll answer your question in a bit, but let me give the 4 bits of evidence because they're relevant and interesting.
Right.
I mean, here, if we want to talk about direct evidence, that means testimony of someone who was there at the time when Jefferson was alive, who saw Jefferson, interacted with Jefferson, who was at Monticello. These are important witnesses. I preface that by saying there is no direct testimony that offers evidence that Jefferson was the father of any Sally Hemings children. No one saw anything in the supposed nearly 40 years that they were supposed to be having an affair. That is ridiculous. To think
how many years?
Near 38, I think it was. She came, till his death in 1826, and she came to France in 1780. 6. So a little later than that, maybe 1787. And so that's close to 40 years that they were together.
Okay.
And, you know, his daughter says, well, they were up to, after Jefferson retired, they're up to 50 people a day staying at Monticello who were not invited to stay. And you're going to think all this is going on and Jefferson is sneaking out for nookie, and no one ever knew anything. No one saw, no one heard, no one saw the slightest bit of intimacy between the two. So there's
Right.
no bit of direct testimony, which belies common sense. Now,
Sounds to me like she was a little sister. Could have been like a little sister to him. There was a big age difference, wasn't there?
yeah, there was no little sister. If you comb his memoranda books, his account books, she was nothing to him. I can say that categorically. She was no different than, you can look at James Hemings, John Hemings, you know, the other Hemings, who were so much more important than Thomas Jefferson. He refers to them quite a bit in those account books. They were doing important. James was a chef, a French chef, you know, went with him to France when he left. John was half brother of James, and he was an accomplished joiner, and so forth. These were important Hemings in Jefferson's life. So I've argued, sort of tongue in cheek, the likelihood of there being a homosexual relationship between Jefferson and one of the other Hemmings boys is more like, that's more likely than having sex with Sally.
Right.
Because these people were quite important to him. He doesn't write much about Sally.
Right.
But you could say, well, he doesn't write much. That's because he knows there's a torrid affair going on. He doesn't want to leave any evidence. Well, that's possible, but what's more likely when there's nothing said? Easier explanation is that he's no interest in her.
Right.
No interest. But going back to the direct testimony, he says on July, I read from some notes here, July 1, 1805, when Jefferson is talking about some charges, and this is an avowed affair that he had with his neighbor, John Walker, his wife, Betsy. And that comes out. And presumably he did either make love to this person's wife or try to make love. I suspect he didn't make love because he was sort of clumsy. And he says to Levi Lincoln in a cover letter, who was in his administration, he says, you will perceive that I plead guilty to one of their charges, there being the people calumniating him, people, you know, accusing him, that when young and single, I offered love to a handsome lady. I not acknowledge its incorrectness. Now he says, to one. And by implication, that means of all the gossip flying around about me, that's the only one.
Right.
That's true. And I admit to it.
Right.
So here, why wouldn't, if there's an affair with Sally Hemings, why wouldn't he say, well, that too? He doesn't. So by implication, and implication is important, he didn't have an affair with Sally Hemings. Well, Gordon Reed and other people at Monticello say, well, he doesn't mention Sally in this. It's not about Sally, so there's no reason for him to talk about her. That's a pretty bad excuse. Now, his overseer, Edmund Bacon, who writes of his time while he's overseer, talking about so-and-so being the potential daughter of Thomas Jefferson through Sally Hemings, he says, she was not his daughter. She was blank's daughter. I know that. I have seen him come out of her mother's room many a morning when I went up to Monticello. By implication, he's seeing a particular person come out of Sally Hemings' room many a morning when I went up to Monticello very early. So he sees someone else coming out, you know, at the scene of the crime, not Thomas Jefferson. Okay. Another piece of evidence, 2 letters that when Abigail Adams, when Mary Jefferson and Sally Hemings come after 2 years while Jefferson's in France, Abigail, the ship sails to England, and Abigail arranges to pick up Mary Jefferson, and Sally Hemings comes with her. Jefferson is completely unaware Sally Hemings has come. He didn't ask for her, asked for an older woman. And Abigail says the girl she, in other words, Mary, his daughter, the girl she has with her wants more care than the child and is wholly incapable of looking properly after her without some superior to direct her.
How old was Sally at the time?
No, Sally is 13, I believe. Mary is 8.
Okay, so Sally's 13 years old when she went to France.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Mary is 8. And you want to, and this, there's an age difference here. 14, she's 14. And what this, and she writes this twice in 2 separate letters, Abigail, that someone who is 14 years old wants more care than the child of 8. So that is direct evidence that she is behaviorally acting at less than an 8-year-old.
Right.
Unless Mary is super precocious. But we have no evidence of that either, because in the exchange of letters between her and her father, she didn't care so much for reading and all the stuffs that her older sister liked. So this again is a problem, because you want to ask, why is it that Jefferson would fall in love with a cute 13-year-old girl who is, acting like a 7-year-old or a 6-year-old?
Right.
You're going to tell me one of the most intelligent people on the planet at the time is going to be attracted even sexually to someone who is just not all that bright? I'm not picking on her. That's what that letter indicates. This is the piece of evidence Isaac Jefferson in 1847 writes of his time. He talks about Jefferson's brother, and he says, old master's brother, Mass Randolph, was a mighty simple man, used to come out among black people, play the fiddle and dance half the night, had much more sense than Isaac. So what that says is Jefferson's brother, Randolph, would hang around at the slaves' quarters, half the night, at many occasions, play the fiddle, dance half the night with the slaves. It puts him at the scene of the crime. Okay. He's in Mulberry Road, where the slaves are. So we know that Jefferson's brother used to hang out with the slaves.
Right.
And that doesn't tell you that he had an affair with Sally Hemings, but he's in the neighborhood.
Okay. Okay.
So those are the 4 pieces of direct testimony that don't show Jefferson had no affair with Sally Hemings, but they need to be explained away by the people at Monticello. They're not. They're swept under the rug.
And there, I'm looking at, I just realized in one of the discussion questions I did, it's for my one of the graduate classes, Gary Davis of Evanston Hospital also points out that Jefferson's father, grandfather, or paternal uncle, one of them, fathered a male slave who had 1 or more children with Sally. Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't. I don't know. I mean, look, the people at Monticello presume and hear that Sally Hemings was monogamous. I use that in the sense of not outside of marriage, but that she had only one lover, and that lover was Thomas Jefferson. Her mother, we know, had 4 different lovers, one of which was Sally Hemings' father, obviously, a white man, a captain, Wales. And we can't just presume that Sally Hemings didn't have an affair with others. In fact, we have indirect testimony. I say indirect because Jefferson's grandchildren write after the fact of the Carr brothers, Peter Carr and his brother, going in and having sex with Sally and Sally's sister. And so that was, again, that's not direct testimony, it's indirect testimony. So, you need to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, well, that would explain, that's another, so we have Randolph, and then we, but if that is, well, I guess we need to determine who fathered her other children, and
well, we don't know where 2 of the children went.
Yeah.
With Madison. Now, interesting, Madison publishes a newspaper article in 1873, which is an important piece of evidence used by, do you have that? Did you show me you had some?
Oh, let's see. Okay,
pipes. Is that the pipe? Do you have that piece or no? I don't know what you have.
Let me see the this one.
No, you don't have that. But anyways, in 1873, he publishes in the Pike County Republican a testimony. And in that testimony, he talks about Jefferson being his father. Let's see if I have it here. Yeah, it's Life Among the Lowly, the first edition in the Pike County Republican in Ohio, right? March 13, 1873. Now, this is the first of a series of sort of interviews that are going to be done. The fourth is another one on Thomas Jefferson. It's a Republican newspaper, but not Republicanism changes, you know, many years after Jefferson's death. And the editor, Samuel Wetmore, did not care for Thomas Jefferson, number one. So he comes out with this bombshell, and in it, he says, he makes the claims that John Wales was the father of Sally Hemings. That seems to be true. That Jefferson fell in love with Sally Hemings while Sally Hemings went to France. No evidence for that. That when Sally Hemings was in France, she realized she could be free, and she negotiated with Jefferson, said, all of our children have to be free when they're 21 if you want me to go back with you. So here again, we have testimony about children that they don't even have. You want me to go back with you? You have to free our children. So you know, a bunch of other things. Dolly Madison begging at some point Sally Hemings to name the child Madison, and all these things. Just, you know, some of the things said are true, some of them are questionable, others are just flatly false. The point is that the people at Monticello and Gordon Reed take this testimony, which is indirect. 1873, how many years after? Madison was not born at the time. He was born in 1805. So anything he says about what happened in France, many years before, you know, a couple decades before he's born. So he can only know through gossip, through word of mouth over the years. He didn't see it.
Right.
Now, Gordon Reed takes this as gospel, right? She just says that just happened. And basically, if you deny any of it, you're racist, because this person was partly Black, presumably. That's the argument. That seems kind of a silly argument. You need to call it into question simply because it's indirect testimony. That's all. I don't take many of the claims very seriously, and we need to take them with a grain of salt. They don't. They take it as gospel. And the narrative at Monticello is framed entirely around this testimony. That would be like when I told you that we had the piece from the grandkids talking about the Carr brothers. Imagine me telling you that we have to take that testimony as gospel when it's indirect. And it's, you know, it's not the way to do good history, right? I have a quote I have from Annette Gordon Reed. She talks about that we have to take this. She says, I acknowledge it's secondary testimony, but it needs to be treated as primary testimony. How you do that, I don't know.
No. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Here's the quote. It says, Madison Hemings' memoirs must stand or fall on the basis of his credibility alone. To that end, it must be said that these memoirs are properly described as items of direct evidence that Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings were involved in a relationship. So she's just basically saying, in spite of the fact it's indirect testimony, I'm calling it direct. And it's going to be treated as direct hereafter. How the hell do you do that as a historian?
Right. Yeah,
anything goes if you allow that step. If you allow the step that indirect testimony can be treated as direct testimony, you can write anything. Thomas Jefferson had sex with a kangaroo when he traveled to Australia, even though he never was there.
Yeah. Oh, we have less than 1 minute. I want the audience to know about your books. Framing a Legend, Exposing the Distorted History of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And also, there's another book by Dr. Holowchak, Did Thomas Jefferson Really Father Sally Hemings' Black Children? A Scholarly Analysis of the Historical and Genetic Evidence.
And I do have copies of the second for $30 for $5 shipping. I can autograph it for you. I
Okay.
go through blow by blow an assessment of these.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you all for joining us today. You can contact Dr. Holowchak at mholowchak@hotmail.com or his Facebook page, Thomas Jefferson, Bring Him Home to Monticellos, Citizens for Change. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Holowchak,
Thank
and
you for having me.
presenting the evidence that you have from all of the study you've done with